Lily stood by the window of her small bedroom, her fingers tracing the worn edges of a photograph she had carried with her everywhere since she was a child. It was a picture of her mother, Sergeant Major Emily Hayes, in full military uniform, standing tall and proud among a group of soldiers. The sunlight slanted through the blinds, casting a soft glow on the framed photo, but Lily's mind was far from the warmth of her room. Her thoughts drifted to the words she had heard that morning, still echoing in her ears. "Your mom was just doing her job, kid. Don't make her sound like a hero." The voice had been dismissive, cold, and devoid of understanding. Officer Carson, with his neatly pressed uniform and polished shoes, had said those words in a tone that left no room for argument. Lily had been speaking about her mother's service to a group of cadets, her voice trembling with pride as she recounted the stories her mother had shared with her. But instead of receiving admiration or respect, she had been met with mockery. The officer's words had stung more than she cared to admit. To him, Emily Hayes was just another soldier, another cog in the machine. But to Lily, she was everything. Lily's mother had been deployed more times than Lily could count. There had been long stretches of silence when the only communication came in the form of letters, written in hurried, sometimes smudged handwriting. In those letters, Emily wrote of missions that Lily couldn't fully understand, of places with names that sounded foreign and dangerous. She wrote of her team, of the people she fought alongside, but the most vivid stories were always about the people she saved, the lives she changed. But those stories were always told in a quiet, humble voice. Emily Hayes didn't boast about her bravery. She didn't flaunt her accomplishments. She never wanted the spotlight. When Lily was young, she would often ask her mother why she did, what she did, why she volunteered for dangerous missions, why she faced risks no one else would. And Emily would simply reply, "Because someone has to, sweetheart. It might as well be me." That wasn't enough for Lily today. The words Officer Carson had said still twisted in her stomach. Her mother wasn't just another soldier. She was the person who had saved countless lives, the one who had kept the peace in places where chaos reigned. She was a woman who had held the weight of the world on her shoulders without asking for recognition. She had sacrificed everything for a country that never truly acknowledged the cost. Lily closed her eyes, her fingers tightening around the photo. The loss of her mother had left a hole in her heart that no one could fill, not even the officers who tried to offer sympathy. They could never understand the depth of Emily's sacrifices, the weight she carried with each deployment, the nights she spent away from her family, the wounds, both seen and unseen, that she had carried with her all these years. But what hurt the most was the realization that Lily would have to fight to make others see what she knew to be true. Her mother was not a hero because of the medals or accolades she had earned. She was a hero because she never stopped fighting, never stopped believing in something greater than herself. And that, Lily thought, was the kind of strength that deserved to be acknowledged, not mocked. She glanced out the window once more, a sense of determination rising in her chest. This story, her mother's story, would not be forgotten, not while Lily had a voice to tell it. She would make sure of that. Lily sat at the edge of the long table in the base's community hall, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Around her, young cadets spoke in hushed tones, their conversations drifting between nervous anticipation and half-hearted jokes. They were all waiting for the briefing to begin, some scrolling through their phones, others pretending to look busy. Lily wasn't really sure why she'd been invited to speak that day. She wasn't a soldier, just the daughter of one, but that had never stopped her from feeling like part of this world. After all, her mother had served proudly, and her story deserved to be heard. She shifted in her seat as the door to the briefing room opened. Officer Carson entered first, his uniform crisp and his expression cold, followed by a group of cadets who were murmuring quietly among themselves. The tension in the air was thick, but it was nothing new for Lily. She had learned long ago to carry herself with a quiet confidence that masked her nerves. Today, though, was different. She was going to tell her mother's story, and she wasn't going to let anyone silence her. Carson took his place at the front of the room, his voice booming as he addressed the group. "All right, cadets, listen up. We've got a special guest today. Lily Hayes, the daughter of Sergeant Major Emily Hayes, will be sharing a few words about her mother's service." Lily stood, her breath catching in her throat. She could feel the eyes of the room on her as she made her way to the front. There was a hum of curiosity in the air, but it quickly shifted to something else, a subtle judgment, maybe even condescension. She tried not to let it bother her. After all, her mother had always told her to stand tall, no matter what. She cleared her throat and began speaking. "My mom, Sergeant Major Emily Hayes, served in the military for over 25 years. She was involved in missions across the globe, from Desert Storm to humanitarian work in places like Somalia and Bosnia. I've heard stories of the people she saved, of the risks she took, and of the friendships she formed along the way." Lily paused, looking out at the room. Some of the cadets were leaning in, others were still looking at their phones. She pushed forward. "But what most people don't know is how many times she almost didn't come home. The missions she went on weren't just about combat. They were about making sure others got a chance to live when the world around them was falling apart. She never sought recognition, never wanted the spotlight. All she ever wanted was to do her part." Lily's voice wavered slightly, but she steadied herself. She never stopped serving, even when they told her she was done. "I know she didn't do it for the medals or the accolades. She did it because she believed in something bigger than herself. And that's the kind of hero she was." The room was quiet for a moment. Then, without warning, Officer Carson spoke up, his voice laced with a hint of derision. "Lily, that's a nice story. But your mum wasn't the only one who served. There were thousands of men and women who did the same. She was just doing her job like everyone else." His words cut through the air like a blade. Lily's heart dropped into her stomach. The room seemed to shift, as if the air had thickened. The cadets looked at each other, some with raised eyebrows, others with subtle smirks. It wasn't just Carson's words that stung, but the way he dismissed everything her mother had stood for. In his eyes, her mum's service didn't matter. She wasn't a hero, she was just another name on a long list of soldiers. Lily tried to keep her composure, but her voice faltered as she continued. "My mom wasn't just doing her job. She was saving lives. She was a hero, even if no one else saw it." The officer's laugh was dismissive, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed through the room. "And you think she's the only one? I'm sure she was a great person, but that's not enough to make her a hero. Heroes don't just exist in stories." The words hit Lily like a punch in the gut. She knew he was wrong, but in that moment the doubt crept in. Maybe Officer Carson had a point. Maybe all her mother's sacrifices really were just a job. She felt the sting of that thought, even though she knew better. It didn't matter what Carson or anyone else thought. Her mother's legacy would always be more than a job. It would always be something far greater. But in that instant, it didn't feel like it. It felt like she had lost the battle before it even began. Lily's hands trembled as she returned to her seat. The weight of Officer Carson's words hung heavy in the room, each one more suffocating than the last. She could feel the eyes of the cadets on her, some sympathetic, some indifferent, others already turning their attention back to their phones. The hum of whispered conversations started up again, but Lily's thoughts were miles away. She had been so sure that sharing her mother's story would honor the woman who had given everything for this country, but instead, she had just been publicly humiliated. Officer Carson's words felt like an echo that reverberated in her chest. Just doing her job like everyone else. The words kept repeating in her mind, mocking her, as if the sacrifices her mother had made were somehow trivial, as if every soldier's service was the same. Lily didn't look up. She kept her gaze fixed on the table in front of her, unable to meet anyone's eyes. She could feel the heat rise in her face, a flush of embarrassment that made her want to disappear. How had it come to this? She was proud of her mother. She had always been proud, even when others didn't understand why her mom had chosen this life. But today, she felt like that pride was being torn from her piece by piece, until all that was left was a raw, painful emptiness. The officer's laugh still echoed in her ears. It was the kind of laugh that only came from someone who believed their opinion was unchallenged, someone who had no interest in hearing another perspective. It was the kind of laugh that dismissed everything Lily had known to be true about her mother's legacy, and it stung deeper than she had expected. Officer Carson turned to address the room, his face smooth, his words measured. "Now that we've heard from Lily, let's move on with the rest of today's briefing." His tone was dismissive, as though Lily's entire presence had been nothing more than an interruption to the day's schedule. He barely glanced at her as he walked to the front of the room, continuing his routine as if nothing had happened. But Lily couldn't just let it go. She couldn't let her mother's memory be reduced to a job. She knew her mom better than anyone, and she knew the sacrifices she had made. The way she had lived in silence, the long deployments, the missed birthdays, the broken holidays. Emily Hayes had given her blood, her sweat, her years, and yet here she was, being belittled by someone who had no understanding of the sacrifices made. Lily's chest tightened with frustration. She had always known that people who had never been part of the military would never understand, but this was something different. Carson didn't care. He didn't care about the pain, the heartbreak, the loss that came with serving. He had dismissed it like it was nothing more than a job description. Something inside Lily snapped. Without thinking, she stood up. The movement was sharp, sudden, and it caught the attention of everyone in the room. She didn't care. She had to speak, even if no one wanted to listen. "You think my mom was just doing her job?" Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. "You think it was all just some task? You don't know what she went through. You don't know what it's like to be the one left behind, waiting for a letter, praying that your mom comes back. You don't know the price of the silence she lived with after every mission. The things she had to bury so that people like you could sit comfortably in your offices, pretending to know what it means to serve." There was a moment of stunned silence. Even Carson's smug expression faltered for just a beat, as if he hadn't expected this kind of response. But it wasn't enough to silence her, and she pressed on. "She wasn't just doing her job," Lily continued, her voice growing steadier. "She was doing the impossible every single day, and I'll be damned if I let anyone forget it." Lily's words hung in the air, still vibrating with raw emotion. The room was dead silent now, and she could feel the weight of every cadet's gaze on her. For a moment, she thought she might have made things worse. She thought she might have gone too far, but she wasn't sorry. Not anymore. Officer Carson finally spoke, his tone softer now, but still condescending. "Lily, I understand that this is personal for you, but—" "No," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "You don't. You never will." She turned and left the room, the sound of her footsteps echoing down the hallway as she stepped out into the cold, empty air. Lily stormed out of the briefing room, the door slamming behind her with a force that echoed down the empty hallway. Her heart pounded in her chest, and the sting of Officer Carson's words still burned in her ears. She had never been this angry before, not even when her mother had been deployed, and she'd spent endless nights worrying if she would ever return. This moment was different. This wasn't about missing her mother or living with the silence of deployment. This was about the heartless dismissal of everything her mother had stood for. She didn't stop walking. Her footsteps were loud against the hard floors. her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of them making her feel any better. She had tried. She had told her mother's story, had stood there in front of a room full of people and bared her soul, hoping they would see the hero she knew. Instead, they saw a job, a task, a routine. Lily paused at the small window by the hallway, her breath fogging up the glass as she stared out at the base. Soldiers were moving in and out of buildings, their faces set in that expression of focus. And routine, it was a world Lily knew well, but in this moment it felt distant, almost foreign. She wasn't one of them. She wasn't the daughter of just any soldier. Her mother had been something more, something that Officer Carson would never understand. But Lily refused to let him, or anyone else, erase the truth. She wiped the tears that had unknowingly slipped down her face, the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. But she didn't let them. Not this time. She would not be defeated, not by Carson, not by anyone. Her defiance was like a fire inside her now. It had been growing for years, fueled by the countless times people had ignored her mother's legacy. It had simmered under the surface, just waiting for a moment like this to break free. And now the moment was here. She wasn't going to let this go. She wasn't going to back down. "Mum," she whispered to herself, her voice steady despite the rage coursing through her veins. "You taught me how to stand tall. I'm going to do that for you." She turned and walked toward the back exit of the building, her pace quickening. She had something to prove. Not just to Officer Carson or the cadets, but to herself. She had to prove that her mother's service wasn't just a job. It was a sacrifice. It was a calling. It was a life lived with honor, even when no one else acknowledged it. Lily knew what she had to do. She couldn't just wait for someone else to speak up. If she wanted her mother's legacy to be seen, she would have to be the one to make it happen. And so, she began to plan. By the time she reached the small maintenance building near the base's south gate, the adrenaline had started to wear off, replaced by a sense of calm determination. She stepped inside and found the workbench where her mother had spent countless hours fixing things that no one else cared to fix. It was a place Lily had visited countless times, a place that held the echoes of her mother's presence. Lily pulled out her phone, her fingers moving quickly as she searched for the information she needed. She was going to write about her mother, about everything that had been ignored, everything that had been overlooked. She would send it to every officer on base, to every cadet, to every soldier who had ever looked past her mother's sacrifices. She wasn't going to just let this story fade. She wasn't going to let them forget who Emily Hayes really was. And as she typed the first words, something shifted inside her. This wasn't about being angry anymore. This was about giving her mother the voice she had always deserved. This was about showing the world that heroes didn't need medals to be recognized. They didn't need a spotlight or accolades. They just needed someone willing to stand up and tell their story. "I won't let them forget you, Mom," Lily whispered under her breath. "Not now. Not ever." The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the base as Lily sat on the steps outside the maintenance building, her phone still in her hand. She had finished writing the email, her heart pounding in her chest as she reread each word. It felt right, but there was still a part of her that hesitated, unsure of how it would be received. Would they listen? Would they even care? Just as she was about to hit send, a loud noise interrupted her thoughts, an engine revving, followed by the unmistakable sound of tires crunching over gravel. Lily glanced up, expecting to see another base vehicle passing by, but instead, a black SUV had pulled into the lot. It was sleek, polished, and out of place among the typical military vehicles that lined the parking area. Lily's heart skipped. A beat. Something about it felt different. The vehicle slowed to a stop near the entrance, and the door opened. A man in a crisp uniform stepped out, his posture immediately commanding attention. Even from a distance, Lily could tell this wasn't just any officer. The way he moved, the deliberate ease with which he stepped out of the car, it was clear that he wasn't here for a routine visit. She watched as the man adjusted his cap and glanced around the parking lot, his eyes scanning the area until they landed on her. He didn't hesitate. His stride was purposeful, confident, and he made his way straight toward her. Lily felt a flicker of unease, but she quickly shook it off. She wasn't about to let her emotions get the best of her. Not now. When the man reached her, he paused, his eyes briefly scanning her face before he offered a slight nod. "Private Hayes?" he asked, his voice deep and measured, with a calm authority that sent a chill down her spine. Lily nodded, feeling a sudden rush of nerves. "Yes, sir. That's me." He didn't immediately speak again. Instead, he seemed to be studying her, his gaze unwavering. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. "I'm General Franklin Ward," he said, his voice now softer but no less commanding. "I've heard about your mother's service, and I wanted to come see you myself." Lily's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. General Franklin Ward. She had heard his name before. Everyone on base had. He was a figure of immense respect, a leader known for his straight-laced demeanor and tough decisions. But why would he be here? Why would he want to speak with her? I don't understand, sir," Lily stammered, her confusion clear. "What do you mean?" General Ward's expression softened, though there was no mistaking the gravity of the moment. He lowered himself slightly, meeting her gaze directly. "Your mother's story," he said, choosing his words carefully. "It's not one that's been told the way it should be. Too many people here have dismissed her sacrifices. I've been doing my own research, and I've come to realize that you were right all along. Your mother deserves to be recognized, and I'm here to make sure that happens." Lily's breath caught in her throat. She had expected to hear some kind of apology, maybe even some form of acknowledgement, but this was different. General Ward wasn't just apologizing. He was standing in front of her, promising to do something about it. "Your mother is a legend," he continued, his voice steady but filled with a quiet reverence. "What she did, what she continues to do for this country, is something that cannot be overlooked, and I will make sure that the entire base understands that." The words hit Lily like a wave, and for a moment she could barely find her voice. You'll do that?" General Ward nodded, a look of resolve in his eyes. "I won't let her legacy be erased, not while I'm in command." Lily swallowed, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This wasn't just some empty promise. General Ward wasn't here to placate her. He was here to take action. And in that moment, Lily realized that her fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. "I won't let them forget her," Lily said quietly, her voice firm now, filled with renewed strength. "I won't let them forget anyone who served like she did." General Ward extended his hand. "Neither will I." As they shook hands, Lily felt a shift inside her. It wasn't just the beginning of a fight for her mother's recognition, it was the start of something bigger, the start of a reckoning. The following morning, the tension at Fort Grantham felt different. There was an air of expectancy that hung over the base, thick and palpable, as if something was about to change, but no one knew exactly what. The routine of morning exercises and drills continued, but the whispers between soldiers had a new urgency, a new purpose. Lily could feel it too, an undercurrent of unrest, a hum of curiosity in the air, like the calm before a storm. She had spent the night going over everything in her mind. The meeting with General Ward had given her a sense of validation, but it had also sparked something inside her. This wasn't just about her mother anymore. This was about everyone who had served, everyone who had been overlooked, dismissed, or forgotten. Her mother's legacy had become a symbol of something much larger than Lily could have ever anticipated. And now she had a role to play in making sure that legacy was seen. Lily stood near the south gate, her fingers wrapped tightly around the strap of her bag, waiting for her next move. She hadn't expected anything immediate to happen, but as the morning passed, the base seemed to shift, and Lily noticed more and more soldiers glancing her way, their expressions uncertain. It was then that the first sign of something big appeared. The sound of heavy engines rumbled from the main entrance, a convoy of black vehicles pulling into the base with precision and purpose. Lily's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't the only one who noticed. Soldiers paused mid-step, their heads turning as the vehicles lined up near the officer's entrance. The gates opened, and military police began to move into position. She didn't need to ask what was happening. The arrival of the convoy was enough. The general. It had to be. General Hawthorne, the one person who could truly make a difference. In this moment, Lily's stomach tightened. She could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her, but she stood tall, the defiant spirit that had carried her through the previous day's ordeal still strong within her. This was it. This was the turning point she had been waiting for. The door of the lead vehicle opened, and a tall, imposing figure stepped out. His uniform was immaculate, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the base, the kind of man who commanded respect without needing to say a word. General Hawthorne. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She had seen pictures of him, heard stories about him from her mother. But seeing him in person was something else entirely. His presence alone was enough to silence the base, as if the very air around him had been shifted by his arrival. General Hawthorne's gaze swept across the lot, taking in the sight of soldiers, cadets, and officers alike standing in tense attention. His eyes met Lily's for a brief moment, and she felt the weight of his stare, sharp and discerning. It wasn't judgment, though. There was something else there. Recognition. He moved forward with steady, purposeful steps, the officers around him falling into line. There was no fanfare, no grand announcements, just the quiet power of a leader who had seen more than most could ever imagine. The soldiers who had been gathered outside, whispering amongst themselves, fell silent as the general approached, their eyes fixed ahead, waiting for his words. Lily's pulse quickened. This wasn't like anything she had imagined. The man she had been hoping would take action was here. He was real, and he was about to make his presence known. The general stopped at the front of the formation, and for a long moment he simply observed, his eyes moving from one face to the next. The silence was heavy, thick with anticipation. Then, as if on cue, General Hawthorne spoke, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I've heard a lot of talk over the past few days," he began, his tone even but firm, "but now it's time for action." Lily felt the weight of those words. This was it. The reckoning she had hoped for, the change she had been fighting for, was about to unfold, and she wasn't the only one who felt it. The soldiers stood straighter, their eyes fixed on the general, their posture a reflection of the respect he commanded. General Hawthorne continued, his voice low and deliberate. "It's time for us to acknowledge the service of those who have quietly given everything. It's time for us to honor not just the ones in the spotlight, but the ones who have been working behind the scenes, those who have carried the weight without ever asking for recognition." Lily's heart raced as the general's words hung in the air. This was more than just a moment for her mother. It was a moment for everyone who had ever served without recognition. The silence that followed was filled with a sense of something new being born, a shift in the base's very foundation. General Hawthorne's voice echoed through the tense air, carrying with it the weight of years of service, of battles fought, and of the countless lives that had been touched by those who wore the uniform. The soldiers around Lily stood at rigid attention, their faces a mixture of confusion, awe, and curiosity, but none of them spoke, None of them moved. Lily felt the intensity of the moment press down on her chest, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She had known this moment would come, the moment when everything shifted. But now that it was here, she found herself struggling to breathe, her thoughts swirling in a whirlwind of disbelief. This wasn't just about her mother anymore. It was about every soldier who had ever been overlooked, every soldier who had never been given the recognition they deserved. It was about the ones who had been forgotten. General Hawthorne stepped forward, his eyes sweeping over the group of soldiers before him, his expression hardening as he spoke. The story of Sergeant Major Emily Hayes has been told in whispers, dismissed in the shadows, but no longer. Today, we acknowledge the legacy of a woman who has done more for this country than most will ever understand. Lily's heart skipped a beat. It was happening. The base, the soldiers who had once mocked her mother's story, were finally hearing the truth. She served with honor in Desert Storm, General Hawthorne continued, his voice unwavering. She earned a Silver Star for valor under fire in Hugh City. She led troops, saved lives, and stood tall in the face of the enemy, even when the odds were against her. And yet, there are those among us who would have you believe she was just another name on a list. Lily's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. She had dreamed of this moment, had longed for someone, anyone, to stand up for her mother, and now it was happening. The words General Hawthorne spoke were like a balm to a wound that had festered for too long. The general paused, allowing his words to sink in. The soldiers before him shifted slightly, their postures stiffening as they realized the gravity of what they had just heard. This wasn't a story of some anonymous soldier. It was a story of bravery, sacrifice, and leadership. It was a story that had been ignored for far too long, but now it was being thrust into the light. General Hawthorne turned to face Lily, his gaze softening slightly. "And this," he said, his voice steady, "is her daughter, Lily Hayes, a young woman who carries her mother's legacy with the same pride and strength that Sergeant Major Hayes herself did every day of her life. And for that, Lily deserves our respect." Lily's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the general. Respect. The word hung in the air like a promise, and in that moment, it felt like everything she had fought for, the sleepless nights, the frustration, the loneliness, had led to this, a simple word, but one that meant everything. For the first time, she felt like her mother's sacrifices had been seen, truly seen. Then, as if the entire base had been waiting for permission, General Hawthorne straightened and raised his hand in a crisp, deliberate salute. It was a formal gesture, but the meaning behind it was anything but ordinary. Lily's heart leaped in her chest as the soldiers around her began to follow suit, one by one, standing taller and saluting the woman whose legacy they had so casually dismissed just days before. The cadets, the officers, even those who had laughed, now stood with their arms raised, acknowledging not just a woman's service, but the value of every life that had been touched by her. Lily stood frozen, the weight of the salute pressing down on her. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but she never thought it would feel this overwhelming. The respect wasn't just for her mother, it was for everyone who had ever served quietly in the shadows, for everyone who had given their all without ever asking for recognition. It was for the ones who had never been given their due. General Hawthorne held the salute for a moment longer before slowly lowering his arm. The silence that followed was thick with emotion, and for a moment it seemed as though time itself had stopped. The ceremony was brief, but in that brief moment, Lily understood something that had eluded her for so long. Her mother's legacy wasn't defined by the medals or the formal recognition. It was defined by the lives she touched, by the soldiers who had stood by her side, and by the unwavering respect that came only with true heroism. The general turned to her then, his voice quiet but firm. "You've done well, Lily. You've made sure she was seen." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Lily smiled. It was a small smile, but it was enough. The day after the ceremony, the mood at Fort Grantham had shifted completely. Where once there was an air of casual disregard for Sergeant Major Emily Hayes's legacy, there was now a quiet reverence. Soldiers spoke of her with respect, and the officers who had once dismissed her contributions now found themselves forced to reckon with the weight of her service. For Lily, the recognition felt like both a relief and a challenge. She knew this was just the beginning, but she also understood the deeper importance of what had transpired. General Hawthorne had set the stage, but there was more to be done. Lily sat in the small office behind the base's main building, flipping through the folder that had been handed to her by General Hawthorne the day before. It was an unassuming manila folder, its edges worn with age, but the contents inside were anything but ordinary. She had been given access to her mother's military records, everything she had earned, every mission she had been part of, and the acknowledgement of her service that had been kept behind closed doors for far too long. The folder was filled with paperwork, commendations, and mission logs. But what caught Lily's eye first was the stack of photographs neatly tucked into the back. She carefully pulled them out, her fingers trembling as she sorted through them. There were pictures of her mother in uniform, standing tall beside fellow soldiers, crouched behind enemy lines during a mission, or giving orders to her team with the quiet confidence Lily had always known. There was one particular photo that stopped Lily's breath. Her mother, Sergeant Major Emily Hayes, standing at the front of a line of Marines, a row of medals pinned to her chest, her face a study in calm determination. Lily had never seen this photo before. She had known her mother was a hero in her own right, but this image captured a different side of Emily, a side that had never been shared with her. In this moment, her mother's strength was undeniable, and the weight of it pressed down on Lily's chest. This wasn't the quiet, humble woman who had always come home and tucked away her service for the sake of family. This was the leader, the warrior, the force that had shaped so many lives, yet had remained hidden in the shadows of history. Lily's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the photograph, the face of the woman who had been her entire world, but had never fully shared her world with Lily. Her mother's past was a tapestry woven with stories of battle, sacrifice, and quiet courage. Stories that had never been told in their entirety until now. She flipped through more pages, each one revealing more about her mother's career, the Bronze Star, the Silver Star, the countless citations and letters of commendation that spoke of her leadership and valor. But there was one letter that stood out above all others, a letter from the Commandant of the Marine Corps, dated 1993, which spoke of Emily Hayes's unwavering commitment to the mission and to the men she led. The letter detailed a specific mission during Desert Storm, where her mother's actions had saved a battalion trapped behind enemy lines, despite overwhelming odds. Her mother had led them to safety, with no thought of her own survival. Lily felt a lump rise in her throat as she read the words. This was the woman she had always known, yet she had never truly understood the depths of her sacrifice. She set the letter down, her heart heavy with pride and grief. Emily had been everything to Lily, but in this moment, Lily realized that the woman who had raised her, the mother she had adored, was a different person altogether than the one who had left for war and returned with pieces of herself missing. This was the woman who had shaped history, who had made choices no one should have to make, and yet had done so without ever asking for recognition. Lily closed the folder, feeling the weight of the past settle around her. It was time to share these stories. It was time for everyone to see her mother not just as a hero, but as the legend she truly was. She had her work cut out for her, But now, more than ever, she knew it was worth it. She had uncovered the past, and now she would ensure that it would be seen for what it truly was, a testament to strength, honor, and the silent sacrifices made by so many. The evening air was thick with the smell of damp earth as Lily sat on the porch of her small home, the manila folder containing her mother's military records resting beside her. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long, soft shadows across the yard. She had spent the better part of the afternoon sifting through the documents, letters, photographs, medals. But it was the quiet evening that allowed her time to reflect, to truly understand the depth of what she had uncovered. As she sat there, her mind kept drifting back to the image of her mother standing proudly at the front of the Marines, a line of soldiers behind her, all of them looking to her for guidance. The face that had always been so familiar to her was now a symbol of strength, a face that had once belonged to someone her peers had only ever called Mom. But Lily had come to understand that her mother had been more than that. She had been the glue that held people together, the quiet force that gave others hope in the darkest of times. That bond, though never spoken aloud, had shaped so many lives, and it had always been something Lily could feel without truly understanding. There was a knock on the door, a sound that startled her from her thoughts. She hadn't been expecting anyone. Tentatively she rose and opened the door to find General Hawthorne standing on the other side, his military posture as precise as ever. But there was something different in his eyes, something that suggested this visit wasn't just a matter of protocol. "General," Lily said, surprised but not entirely shocked. She had expected him to return, but the timing was unexpected. "Lily," he replied softly, his voice carrying a quiet respect she had yet to hear from anyone else. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," she answered quickly, stepping aside to let him in. "Please come in." General Hawthorne stepped inside, and the two of them stood awkwardly for a moment before he motioned toward the chair across from her. "May I?" Lily nodded, gesturing to the seat as she sat down again, the folder still in her lap. The general sat across from her, the silence stretching between them, but it was not an uncomfortable one. There was an understanding in the air, unspoken but palpable. He had known her mother. He had served beside her, in the heart of battles Lily could only imagine. There was a bond between them that Lily could feel, even though it was never acknowledged. "Outright, you've been going through the records," General Hawthorne said after a long pause. His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "I imagine it's overwhelming." Lily nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the folder. "It's more than I expected," she confessed. "I knew my mum was strong, but seeing everything she did, everything she went through, it's hard to grasp. It's like I'm learning about a woman I never truly knew." General Hawthorne's gaze softened. "It's not uncommon," he said gently. "She was a leader, Lily. A leader in every sense of the word. But the thing about leaders like your mother is they carry their burdens alone. They protect others so that others never have to see the full weight of the responsibility they bear." Lily's throat tightened, and she found herself struggling to speak. She was so quiet about everything, so private. It's like she never wanted anyone to see how hard it was, how much it cost her. "That's how she was," General Hawthorne replied, his voice filled with quiet admiration. "She didn't lead for the recognition. She led because it was the right thing to do. She carried her own burdens so that others wouldn't have to, and she did it without fanfare, without complaint. She had a rare gift, Lily. She knew how to protect without making it about herself." Lily swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "I always wondered why she never talked about it, why she kept everything to herself." "Some things are too heavy to speak," General Hawthorne said softly, his eyes locking with hers. And some bonds are so strong, so unbreakable, that words can never do them justice. Lily nodded slowly, understanding now in a way she hadn't before. There had been so much her mother had carried, so many sacrifices that had never been spoken of. But now, she realized, those sacrifices weren't just hers to bear. They were Lily's as well, in a different way. The bond between them wasn't just one of blood. It was the legacy of what Emily Hayes had done for her country, and now Lily had the responsibility to honor that legacy. "I'm not going to let them forget her," Lily said quietly, her voice firm. "I'm going to make sure her story is told." General Hawthorne smiled, a rare warmth in his expression. "I know you will, Lily, and I'll be here to help every step of the way." In that moment, Lily understood. There were unspoken bonds, yes, but there was also strength in the silence, and now, more than ever, she was ready to carry that strength forward. The weeks following General Hawthorne's visit passed in a blur. Lily's days were filled with a mix of emotions, pride, frustration, determination, as she worked to share her mother's story. She'd done more than just gather documents and photos. She had spoken with soldiers who had served alongside. Her mother listened to their stories of her quiet leadership, of her bravery under fire. Each conversation only deepened Lily's resolve to make sure the world knew the truth about Emily Hayes. But despite all the progress, Lily couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was still missing. She had gathered the pieces, her mother's medals, the commendations, the personal accounts from those who had served with her. But there was a part of Emily's legacy that wasn't captured in the records. It wasn't about the medals or the honors. It was about the person her mother had been, the spirit that had driven her, and the life she had lived beyond the uniform. One late afternoon, Lily found herself in the small room at the base where she had first read through her mother's records. The sun was low in the sky, casting a warm glow through the windows, and the room felt more like a sanctuary than an office. She had pulled out the box of old letters that had been sent from her mother during her deployments. Lily had never read them before. Her mother had always kept them locked away, as if they were too personal to share. But now, with everything she had learned, Lily felt ready to understand the parts of her mother's life that had remained a mystery for so long. The first letter was dated 1992, a year before Lily was born. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling as she read the words written in her mother's familiar hand. "My dearest Lily, I wish I could be with you right now. I can't tell you everything about where I am, but know this. Every step I take, every mission I complete, it's for you. I'm doing this for you, to build a future where you can grow up in a world without war. I miss you more than words. Can say, I can't wait to hold you in my arms again. You're always in my thoughts. Until then, I carry you with me, in my heart." Lily blinked back tears as she read the letter again, her heart aching at the thought of her mother, far away, writing to her as though she could reach out and touch her. It was clear in her words that Emily's love for her had never wavered, even in the midst of the horrors she must have been facing. She had fought not just for her country, but for Lily, for a better life for the both of them. Lily placed the letter down and picked up another, this one from 1994, after Lily had been born. She read through it, her heart swelling with pride. As her mother's voice came through the words, "Lily, my sweet girl, you don't know it yet, but you are the reason I fight. Every day I do my job. Every mission I go on, I do it for you. I can't be there to tuck you in at night, but I know you're growing strong and brave just like me. You are my strength, my reason for everything. Stay strong, little one. I'll be back before you know it." Lily couldn't help but smile through the tears. Her mother had always been a woman of few words, but in these letters she saw something else: vulnerability, love, sacrifice. Her mother hadn't just been a soldier. She had been a mother who loved her daughter more than anything in the world, and that love had driven her every step of the way. The letters were a window into the woman Lily had always admired but had never truly understood. Emily Hayes wasn't just a name on a military record. She was a mother, a woman with dreams and fears, with hopes for her child's future. And Lily realized as she sat there with the letters scattered around her that she wasn't just honoring her mother's legacy in a military sense. She was honoring her as a mother, as a person who had fought not for recognition, but for the simple hope of a better world for her daughter. Lily sat back in the chair, the letters pressed to her chest, and for the first time in a long while she allowed herself to feel the weight of the pride she had always carried for her mother. It was a pride that was not just born out of medals or accolades, but from the quiet moments, the love that transcended distance and time. Her mother had given everything, and now it was Lily's turn to make sure that everything her mother had done would never be forgotten. With renewed strength, Lily knew one thing for certain. Her mother's legacy wasn't just about the battles fought. It was about the love that had fueled every step along the way. And that, above all else, was something worth fighting for. The days blurred together in a rush of activity after Lily's discovery of her mother's letters. She had shared them with a few of the soldiers who had served with Emily, but the weight of the truth still felt heavy in her heart. As much as she had uncovered about her mother's heroic actions, there was still so much left unsaid. She knew that if she truly wanted to honor her mother's legacy, she had to go deeper, past the official records and commendations. There was something about her mother's story, something that still felt incomplete. One afternoon, Lily received an unexpected call from General Hawthorne. His voice was steady, but there was an urgency to it that caught her attention. "Lily, I need you to come to the archives. There's something you need to see." She didn't ask questions. She knew this was important. She grabbed her jacket and headed straight for the base, her thoughts racing with the possibility of what the general had uncovered. As she approached the archive building, a sense of unease settled over her. It wasn't just the cold air that made her shiver. It was the feeling that she was about to uncover something that would change everything she thought she knew about her mother. Inside, the general was waiting for her, his expression grim. He motioned for her to sit at the small desk in the corner. The room was dimly lit, filled with old files and documents, the air thick with dust. The silence between them was heavy, as though both of them knew this moment was too important for idle chatter. "What's going on, sir?" Lily asked, trying to mask the fear in her voice. General Hawthorne placed a folder in front of her. It was old, its edges yellowed and fragile, and it looked out of place in the otherwise well-kept room. "This was sent to me anonymously a few days ago. I didn't know about it until after our meeting." He hesitated, as if unsure how to proceed. "What's inside might shed some light on the things your mother went through during her time in service." Lily opened the folder carefully, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled out the papers inside. The first page was a report, military jargon and code names that made her head spin. But the next page was what caught her eye. It was a handwritten note, dated 1992. The writing was neat, but there was an unmistakable sense of urgency in the words. It read, "Sergeant Major Hayes has been involved in a covert operation far outside the scope of her usual duties. The nature of the mission is classified, but it has caused significant distress within her unit. There are concerns that she is being kept in the dark about the true objectives of the operation, and that her involvement may be a result of higher-ups pushing her past her limits." Lily's breath caught in her throat as she read the words. Her mother had always been the quiet, reliable soldier, never one to question orders, never one to speak out against the system. But this suggested that she had been part of something darker, something far more complicated than Lily had ever imagined. She flipped through the pages, her heart pounding faster as she uncovered more about the operation. The report mentioned classified objectives, mysterious meetings, and a team of soldiers who had gone missing during the mission. The deeper she read, the clearer it became that her mother had been forced into a situation she hadn't fully understood. The weight of it all settled on her shoulders, and she felt the crushing burden of a truth she had never anticipated. This wasn't just another mission, was it? Lily's voice was barely a whisper. General Hawthorne sighed, sitting down across from her. No, it wasn't. Your mother was involved in something much bigger than anyone realized, and for a long time she didn't know the full truth of it, but I think she suspected something wasn't right. That's why she never talked about it, because she knew too much, but couldn't say a word. Lily's hands clenched around the papers, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Her mother had been a pawn in a game much larger than herself, forced into a situation where she had to navigate a moral and emotional labyrinth, all while maintaining the facade of the loyal soldier. As the truth began to settle in, Lily realized that her mother's silence had been a form of protection, not just for herself, but for the soldiers around her, for the mission that had gone awry, for the larger forces at play. Emily Hayes had borne more than anyone knew, and now Lily understood just how deep her mother's sacrifices had run. "Are you ready to tell this part of the story?" General Hawthorne asked gently, his eyes locked on hers. Lily didn't hesitate. Yes, it's time for the truth to come out. In that moment, the weight of the past finally began to make sense. It wasn't just about her mother's medals or her heroism. It was about the truth that had been buried, the sacrifices that had been made, and the courage it took to live with the knowledge of what had happened. And Lily knew that this was the story that needed to be told. The whole story. The days following the discovery in the archives were a blur for Lily. The weight of her mother's hidden past pressed on her with a force she hadn't expected. The secrecy, the covert operations, the battles fought in silence. It all unraveled like a tangled mess, each new piece revealing more about the woman she thought she knew. But there was one thing that Lily couldn't ignore. The moment when the truth would be exposed to those who had once dismissed her mother's sacrifice. It wasn't just her mother's story anymore. It was a story for every soldier whose service had been reduced to nothing but a job. One afternoon, a call came in. It was from Officer Carson, the man who had mocked her so openly, who had made her feel small in front of the entire base. His voice on the other end of the line was different than it had been before. It was quieter, tinged with something Lily couldn't place. "Lily," he said, his words tentative, "I need to speak with you in person." Lily hesitated for a moment, then nodded, even though she knew he couldn't see her. She wasn't sure what had prompted the call, but something in his voice made her wonder if he had come to regret the words he had said. She agreed to meet him at the small cafe on base, a place where soldiers often gathered between shifts. It was a neutral space, away from the formality of the barracks or the administration offices. When she arrived, Officer Carson was already sitting at a corner table, his hands clasped in front of him. His uniform was still impeccable, but there was a weariness in his posture, a tightness around his eyes that spoke of something deeper than just a long day of work. Lily approached, not sure what to expect. The anger she had once felt for him, the dismissive way he had treated her mother's legacy, still lingered in the back of her mind. But there was something else there now, too. Maybe it was empathy. Maybe it was the knowledge that even the hardest people had their moments of reckoning. She sat down across from him, studying his face. He didn't immediately speak, as if choosing his words carefully. After a moment, he let out a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what happened," he said, his voice low, "about everything that's come to light since then. And I need to apologize." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "I was wrong. About your mother, about you." Lily remained quiet, unsure of how to respond. This wasn't the apology she had expected. There was no defense, no excuse for his behavior. Instead, it was a quiet, unexpected admission of guilt. She could see the regret in his eyes, the weight of it hanging over him. "I was just doing my job," Officer Carson continued, his voice tight. "I thought I was doing what was right, following the rules. But I didn't know everything. I didn't know what your mother had been through, what she had sacrificed. All I saw was a woman who had been in the military too long, someone who had become just another face in the crowd. I didn't understand that there was so much more to her, to all of them, than what's in the reports." Lily listened, her emotions still raw but shifting. She had waited for this moment, had imagined what she would say if the apology ever came, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure if it would change anything. The damage had already been done. Her mother's legacy had been mocked, reduced, to nothing in front of an audience, and that couldn't be undone. "I'm sorry for how I treated you," he added, his voice softer now. "I should have known better. You didn't deserve that." Lily sat back in her chair, considering his words. This was the moment she had dreamed of, seeing him acknowledge the wrong he had done. And yet, the anger she had carried with her, for so long, began to fade, replaced by something else. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something closer to understanding. "I appreciate your apology," Lily said quietly, her gaze steady. "But words aren't enough. My mother deserved better. She deserved to be seen, and she wasn't. Not by you, not by anyone until now." He nodded, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of her words had finally settled on him. "I know, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen again. She deserves to be honored, and so do you." Lily met his gaze, her expression softening slightly. This wasn't about redemption for him. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about making sure that her mother's story, the story of every soldier who had been overlooked, was no longer ignored, and that was enough. "You have a chance to do the right thing now," Lily said. "Don't waste it." The next few days felt like a whirlwind to Lily. News of General Hawthorne's words about her mother, about the real story of Sergeant Major Emily Hayes, had spread quickly across the base. The soldiers, cadets, and officers who had once scoffed at her mother's legacy were now talking about it in hushed tones, their conversations laden with new respect. Lily knew that the battle wasn't over yet, but there was a shift, a subtle but undeniable shift, in how people saw her mother. But there was still one person who hadn't fully confronted the weight of his actions, Officer Carson. After their conversation at the cafe, Lily couldn't help but feel a nagging curiosity about what he would do next. He had apologized, yes, but apologies were only meaningful when followed by change. Lily hadn't seen any sign of that yet. She knew his words had been genuine, but there was still something unresolved between them. It was more than just the words of an apology. It was about the actions that came after. The following afternoon, Lily found herself standing outside the mess hall, her arms folded across her chest as she waited for Carson. She had agreed to meet him again, but this time it wasn't for any formal discussion or briefing. This time it was for something far more personal. Officer Carson appeared after a few minutes, walking toward her with his hands shoved into his pockets. His uniform was crisp as always, but there was a tiredness about him now, an exhaustion in his step that hadn't been there before. When he reached her, he stopped and looked at her for a moment, his eyes filled with a quiet regret. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Carson began, his voice softer than it had ever been. "About my actions, about what I said. I can't undo the damage, but I'm hoping I can do something to make it right." He took a slow breath, his posture shifting, as if he had just come to terms with something important. "I owe you a better apology than what I gave you last time." Lily stood silently, watching him carefully. She had expected more words, maybe even more excuses, but there was something different about the way he was standing now. It wasn't the defiance she had seen when they first met. It was something more vulnerable. For the first time, she saw him as someone who truly understood the weight of what had been done. "I've spent too much of my life following orders, telling myself that I was just doing my job, that I was part of a system I couldn't change," he continued, his gaze downcast. "But that's not an excuse for the way I treated your mother, or the way I treated you. I dismissed both of you when you deserved better. You deserved to be heard, and I failed to give you that." Lily's heart tightened as she listened. She had never expected to hear him speak like this, not after everything that had happened. She had always seen him as someone who thrived on power, who dismissed anything that didn't fit into his rigid worldview. But now, in front of her, he was showing her a side of himself she had never imagined. A side that was, for once, stripped of pride and defensiveness. "I was wrong," he added quietly, "and I'm sorry. More than you'll ever know. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to do what I can to make sure something like this never happens again. Your mother, she deserved the highest respect, and I took that from her and from you." For a long moment, Lily said nothing. The words she had been waiting for were finally here, but they didn't feel as cathartic as she had imagined. Maybe because an apology, no matter how heartfelt, couldn't undo the hurt. Maybe because some wounds went too deep for words to heal. She took a breath, meeting his gaze. "I don't know if you understand what this apology really means," she said softly, her voice steady but not without emotion. "It's not just about saying the words. It's about showing up, being better than the person you were before. For my mother. For me." Officer Carson nodded, his expression somber, but resolute. "I will. I promise you that." Lily nodded back, feeling the weight of the conversation settle into the space between them. This wasn't a moment of forgiveness, it was a moment of change. The apology he had given her wasn't about erasing the past, but about moving forward, with integrity, and in that moment, Lily realized that the true work had only just begun for both of them. "I'll hold you to that," she said softly, her voice carrying the quiet strength of someone who knew that words had power, but actions were what truly mattered. The transformation within Fort Grantham was subtle at first. At first it was just a shift in whispers. Those who had once laughed at Emily Hayes' story now spoke of her with hushed reverence. Lily could feel the change, though it was small, and it wasn't just in the way soldiers moved past her in the hallways or the way they looked at her with newfound respect. It was in the small things, the nods, the unspoken acknowledgement that something had shifted. Lily didn't expect immediate results, not really. She knew that changing minds was a long, slow process, but she had to admit that the weight of her mother's legacy, once hidden and mocked, was starting to shine through. The cracks. It wasn't just General Hawthorne's words anymore, though they had been the spark. It was a collective understanding that her mother's heroism wasn't something that could be dismissed. But there was one moment that truly marked the shift from mockery to respect. It happened on a particularly cold morning, a day that felt different, almost electric with the promise of change. Lily had been walking through the barracks, heading to a meeting with some of the officers about an upcoming event to honor veterans, when she noticed a group of soldiers standing around. The bulletin board. They were talking in low voices, but as she drew closer, she heard her name. She stopped just a few feet away, listening as one of the soldiers spoke. "I never knew," he said, his voice low. "What she did, I mean. I thought it was all Just another war story, you know? Lily's heart tightened, but she remained where she was, unwilling to break the moment. Yeah, me neither, another soldier said. I always thought she was just some old-timer who liked to hang around and fix stuff, but when the general talked about her, man, that hit hard. The first soldier nodded. She wasn't just fixing gates. She was holding the damn base together, and no one even noticed. Lily's chest tightened. The words were simple, but they carried weight. It was the first time she had heard anyone admit that they had been wrong, that they had misjudged her mother, but it wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the shift in their voices. They weren't laughing anymore. They weren't mocking. They were paying homage, quietly and with sincerity. One of the soldiers, a young man who had been stationed at the base for just a few months, looked over at Lily as if sensing her presence. His eyes widened for a moment, and then he cleared his throat. "Private Hayes," he said, his voice tentative but respectful. I just wanted to say, I didn't know your mother, but hearing what General Hawthorne said, and reading about her, I'm proud to be here, knowing that someone like her was a part of this place." Lily stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. She had always thought of her mother's legacy as something private, something personal. But now, standing in front of these soldiers, she realized that it wasn't just hers anymore. It was theirs too. Her mother's story had become a symbol of strength and sacrifice for them, even if they hadn't understood it at first. "Thank you," she said, simply, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It means a lot to me to hear that." The soldier nodded, and the group fell silent for a moment, a shared understanding settling over them. One by one, the soldiers looked at Lily, their eyes filled with something she hadn't seen before, genuine respect. No longer was she just the daughter of the woman who had been mocked. Now, she was someone whose mother had earned the kind of admiration that couldn't be taken back. As Lily walked away, she felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She had done it. Her mother's legacy had been lifted from the shadows and brought into the light. And now, those who had once dismissed her had begun to understand. What had once been mocked was now revered. It wasn't a complete transformation, not yet. There was still work to be done, but Lily knew that the journey from mockery to respect had begun, and that was enough for now. The day of the honor ceremony arrived, and Fort Grantham was awash in a quiet reverence that had never been felt before. The base, usually buzzing with the noise of daily drills, was subdued today. Soldiers, officers, and cadets moved with purpose, their movements slower, more deliberate. It was as though the entire base had come to a standstill, waiting for something monumental to happen. Lily stood at the edge of the parade ground, her fingers nervously tugging at the fabric of her uniform. She had been to enough ceremonies to know what to expect, the speeches, the salutes, the formalities, but this was different. This wasn't just another routine event. This was for her mother. This was for Emily Hayes, who had spent her life in service without ever asking for the recognition she was now about to receive. Lily glanced around, her eyes catching the faces of soldiers who had once mocked her mother's name. Today they stood at attention, their gazes fixed forward. There were no smirks, no whispers. There was only a quiet, collective respect. The moment had arrived when they would all bear witness to what had always been there, but had been ignored for far too long. General Hawthorne stood nearby, his expression serious but not without warmth. He had played a large part in making this ceremony happen, but Lily knew that it was the soldiers themselves who had made this moment possible. Their change of heart, their newfound respect for Emily Hayes, was what had brought them all here. Today, as the clock struck the hour, the ceremony began. The base's color guard marched onto the field, their movements precise and deliberate. The soldiers lined up in formation, standing at attention as the national anthem played. It was a moment of solemnity, but also of anticipation. This was a turning point, not just for her mother's memory, but for everyone who had served and been forgotten. When the anthem ended, General Hawthorne stepped forward, the crowd falling silent as his voice rang out across the field. Today, we honor the service of Sergeant Major Emily Hayes, a woman who, for far too long, was overshadowed by the demands of duty and the weight of leadership. A woman who gave everything, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. Lily's heart swelled as she heard the words, each one ringing with truth and authority. This was what she had fought for, what she had longed to hear. Her mother's service, once dismissed as just another part of the job, was now being recognized as something far greater. It was a legacy of bravery, of sacrifice, and of love for a country she had protected without ever asking for anything in return. The general continued, detailing Emily's service, her leadership, and her many accomplishments, each word carving a path through the air that was filled with both sorrow and pride. It was a story of a woman who had never sought the spotlight, but had commanded it in every room she entered through actions rather than words. And now, as the general spoke, the world was finally taking notice. After the speech, the color guard stepped aside, and a lone soldier came forward, holding a plaque in his hands. The plaque was simple but beautiful, engraved with Emily's name, her rank, and the words, "In recognition of unparalleled service and sacrifice." It was a tribute, a symbol of everything she had given to the country, and it was placed on a pedestal near the base of the flagpole, where it would remain for years to come. Lily stepped forward, her hands steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. She took the plaque, her fingers brushing over the cold metal as she held it for the first time. The honor was hers to carry now, not just for her mother, but for every soldier whose legacy had been lost in the shadows. As she stood there, holding the plaque in front of her, Lily realized that this moment wasn't just about honoring Emily Hayes. It was about honoring all the silent heroes who had served, who had given everything, and who had never been acknowledged. The base was finally seeing them, finally recognizing them for what they truly were: heroes. The ceremony ended with a final salute, the soldiers standing in unison, their arms raised in tribute to the woman who had never asked for recognition but had earned it all the same. Lily held the plaque to her chest, the weight of it grounding her, reminding her of everything her mother had fought for, and of everything she had yet to do. The weeks that followed the honor ceremony felt like a new chapter in the life of Fort Grantham. The air around the base had changed, charged with a sense of purpose that had never been there before. Lily noticed it in the way soldiers walked, a little taller, in the way cadets stopped and looked toward the memorial plaque for Sergeant Major Emily Hayes whenever they passed by. It wasn't just her mother who had been honored that day. It was the entire idea of quiet service, of the people who gave without asking for anything in return. Lily walked through the base, her eyes scanning the faces of soldiers she had once felt disconnected from. There was no longer the cold indifference she had grown used to. Now she saw acknowledgement. She heard stories about Emily Hayes whispered in hallways, shared in mess halls, passed down from one generation to the next. Her mother had become more than just a name. She had become a symbol of what true sacrifice meant, of leadership that didn't require a uniform, of service that didn't require recognition. But as much as Lily had wanted this transformation to be enough, she knew it wasn't. There were still stories to be told, still memories to be shared. Her mother's legacy, what she had done for the men and women she had led, couldn't just live in whispers or in the plaque that now stood proudly at the center of the base. It had to live in the actions of the people who walked those grounds. It had to inspire something bigger than just a change in perception. Lily had always known that her mother's story wasn't one for the history books, not in the way generals and commanders were remembered. Emily Hayes had never sought that kind of recognition. But what Lily also knew, what she had come to realize, in the weeks after the ceremony, was that her mother's story could still change lives, could still make people better. It could create a ripple that would continue to spread long after the ceremonies were over. One afternoon, Lily found herself sitting in the same small office where she had first read through her mother's records. She had spent countless hours there, piecing together the fragments of Emily's life, working to give her the voice she had never asked for. But today the office felt different. It felt like a starting point. She wasn't just the daughter of Sergeant Major Hayes anymore. She was the one who would ensure her mother's legacy would last. Lily pulled out a notebook, flipping it open to a blank page. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. She started writing about her mother, about the soldiers who had stood by her side, about the countless lives that had been touched by her mother's quiet leadership. She wrote about the lessons Emily had taught her, the lessons she had learned without even realizing it. How her mother had always stood by her beliefs, no matter the cost. How she had led with humility, never seeking anything for herself. How she had shown Lily that true strength wasn't about the accolades you received, but about the difference you made in the lives of others. Lily wrote until her fingers ached, her words flowing faster than she could keep up. She knew this wasn't just about remembering her mother. It was about creating a new legacy, one that would carry her mother's spirit into the future. It was about showing others the power of quiet service, about teaching soldiers and civilians alike that real leadership wasn't about power or recognition. It was about sacrifice, about doing what was right even when no one was watching. When she finished, Lily closed the notebook with a quiet sense of resolve. This was just the beginning. She had so much more to do to ensure that her mother's legacy wasn't just a story told in hushed tones, but a truth that would inspire generations to come. She was no longer just Emily Hayes' daughter. She was the keeper of her legacy, the one who would carry it forward, one story at a time. And in that moment, Lily knew her mother's spirit would live on, forever. Lily walked through the base as she had done so many times before, but today, something felt different. The ground beneath her feet seemed firmer, as if the weight of her mother's legacy had anchored her in a way that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the plaque in the middle of the parade ground anymore, or the stories that soldiers whispered about Emily Hayes. It was more than that. It was the quiet, steady presence of respect that now permeated the base. She passed by soldiers in the halls, noticing the way they nodded at her now, some with shy smiles, others with a quiet acknowledgement. It was a subtle shift, but Lily could feel the change in the air. They no longer saw her as just the daughter of a woman who had served. They saw her as someone who had earned her place here, someone whose voice mattered. It wasn't the kind of recognition she had expected, nor the kind that would bring her fame. It was something more meaningful, something deeper. As she passed by the maintenance shed, the familiar sound of metal clanging against metal drifted through the open door. It was where her mother had spent countless hours fixing things that no one else cared about, repairing gates and fences, and ensuring that the base was held together with the same quiet diligence that had characterized her service. Lily paused, her hand resting on the doorframe, watching the soldiers inside. They were busy, moving with purpose, but as they caught sight of her standing in the doorway, they paused. One by one, they stopped what they were doing and straightened, their heads nodding in her direction. It wasn't a formal salute, but it was enough, a gesture of silent acknowledgement. In that moment, Lily realized that her mother's legacy had become part of their DNA. The quiet work, the leadership without recognition, the unspoken understanding of what it meant to give without asking for anything in return. Lily's chest tightened as she stood there, taking in the sight of the soldiers. They didn't need to say anything. the respect was written in their eyes. Her mother had never asked for this kind of recognition, but Lily had come to understand that it wasn't about her mother needing it. It was about them, the soldiers, recognizing the truth for themselves. They had seen her mother for who she truly was, not the woman who was silently working behind the scenes, but the woman who had shaped the very core of the base. She had been part of them all along. Without a word, Lily stepped inside the shed. The soldiers went back to their tasks, their quiet respect still hanging in the air, unspoken but deeply felt. She moved through the room, her eyes scanning the tools that had once belonged to her mother. Her wrench, the one she had carried, with her everywhere. It was lying on the workbench, worn and well used. Lily reached out, her fingers brushing over it, feeling the familiar weight of it. She didn't need to speak. She didn't need to say anything at all. Her mother's legacy lived in every corner of the base, in every soldier who had come to understand what it meant to serve without expectation. It lived in the quiet stands of respect that had slowly grown among the soldiers, in the way they had started to hold themselves to the same standard her mother had set without ever knowing it. Lily stood there for a moment longer, her hand resting on the wrench as the soldiers continued their work around her. She had come here looking for something, perhaps an acknowledgement, a sign that her mother's legacy had truly been seen. But what she found was something far more powerful. It was a silent stand, a stand made not with words, but with actions, a stand that said, "We see you, we understand." Lily didn't need to say anything. She didn't need to explain. Her mother's service had spoken for itself, and now it was her turn to do the same, to carry that silent stand forward with grace, with humility, and with the quiet strength that had always been her mother's legacy. The days had grown shorter as autumn descended on Fort Grantham, and Lily found herself standing at the edge of the parade ground once again, the wind tugging at the hem of her jacket. The base had changed, but in ways that were subtle, often unnoticed. It wasn't the soldiers' demeanor or the quiet whispers of respect. They were important, of course, but Lily knew that the real shift had to be something deeper, something inside each person who had walked the grounds. They had all learned something, just as she had. But today, Lily was standing in the very spot where the plaque for her mother had been placed. She hadn't expected the change to feel like this. She hadn't expected the weight of it to settle in her chest like it did, as though this was finally the moment when everything she had worked for had come full circle. It wasn't the public recognition that mattered. It was the quiet reflection that followed, the understanding that her mother's service had been something not just for the soldiers who had served alongside her, but for every person who had been touched by her sacrifice. Lily's thoughts drifted back to the early morning she had spent with her mother, watching as Emily Hayes prepared for another day, another mission, another stretch of time where she would be gone. It hadn't been easy for either of them. The loneliness, the fear, the quiet toll that came with never knowing if the person you loved would return. Emily had always carried it all with quiet strength, never allowing her vulnerability to show. She had worn her bravery like armor, but it hadn't been made of steel. It had been made of love, of duty, and of an unshakable belief that her sacrifices were part of something greater than herself. Lily had never fully understood it when she was younger. She had seen the toll it took on her mother, the fatigue, the haunted looks after every deployment. But her mother never talked about the personal cost. She had never spoken about the things she had seen or the parts of herself that had been broken and left behind in the name of duty. She had always carried on with a quiet smile and the gentle patience that had defined every part of her being. Lily had learned to appreciate that strength, to admire it. But today, as she stood on the parade ground, she wondered if her mother had ever fully understood the price she had paid. A part of Lily, the part that was still learning to reconcile the image of her mother as a soldier with the woman who had raised her, longed to ask her, to know what had gone through her mother's mind during those long, solitary nights when she was away. Had Emily ever questioned her choices? Had she ever wondered if the sacrifices were worth it? Lily wasn't sure she would ever know the answers to those questions, but standing there, surrounded by the quiet reverence of the base, she realized that she didn't need to. Emily had done it because she believed in something greater than herself. She had done it because it was who she was, someone who led without asking for acknowledgement, someone who fought for others without expecting anything in return. Her mother's reflection wasn't in the medals or the commendations or the ceremony. It was in the hearts of those who had known her, in the quiet moments when soldiers spoke her name with respect, in the way Lily now understood that her mother's strength had been built on love, on sacrifice, and on the willingness to protect what mattered most, even if it meant giving everything. Lily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her mother's absence, but also the warmth of the legacy she had left behind. There were no more questions left to ask, no more doubts to struggle with. Emily had done her part, and now it was Lily's turn to carry that legacy forward, to live with the same quiet dignity, to honor the unspoken sacrifices that had defined her mother's life. With one last look at the plaque that now stood as a testament to Emily's life, Lily turned and walked away. There was peace in her heart now, a quiet understanding that the reflection of a mother's love, strength and sacrifice would live on long after the world had forgotten the battles fought in the shadows. The wind carried the faint scent of fallen leaves as Lily walked across the base, her footsteps slow but purposeful. The sun was low in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the parade ground. It had been a long road to this moment, filled with doubt, frustration, and the weight of carrying a legacy that had once been ignored. But now, everything had changed. Emily Hayes's story was no longer whispered in the shadows. It had been brought into the light, and for the first time, Lily felt a sense of peace. Her mother's name had become a symbol of strength, not just among the soldiers who had served with her, but within the very fabric of the base itself. The plaque in the center of the parade ground, the stories that were now shared openly in the mess hall, and the quiet acknowledgement from soldiers and officers alike, it all marked a shift that Lily had never anticipated. But this wasn't the end. It wasn't the conclusion of her mother's legacy. No, this was just the beginning. As she approached the small office where she had first seen her mother's records, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. It wasn't the kind of burden that felt heavy. It felt like an honor, a privilege. Her mother had passed on the torch of service, not just through her career, but through the quiet moments of teaching Lily the value of sacrifice, of loyalty, of leading without seeking recognition. Now, Lily was ready to carry that torch forward. Inside the office, General Hawthorne stood by the window, looking out over the base with a contemplative expression. When he turned and saw Lily, his face softened with the smallest of smiles. "You're here," he said, his voice steady, though there was something in it that suggested he knew the significance of this moment. He wasn't just talking about Lily's arrival. He was talking about the passing of a legacy from her mother to her. Lily nodded, feeling a quiet confidence she hadn't known she was capable of. "I'm ready, sir," she said simply. "I've learned so much, but there's more to be done. It's time for me to take my place in this story." General Hawthorne didn't say anything at first, just nodded in understanding. He had always known that Emily Hayes had been the quiet force behind the base's success. But he also knew that her story was one that would have to continue, and Lily, her daughter, was the one who would carry it forward. "You've already done more than most," the general said, his voice filled with respect. "Your mother would be proud. But it's not just about honoring the past. It's about leading forward, ensuring that the values she instilled in this place remain alive for those who come after. Lily took a deep breath. She knew exactly what he meant. The stories, the plaques, the ceremonies. They were all important, yes, but they were not enough. What mattered now was how the base would continue to honor those values, values that her mother had lived by without ever expecting anything in return. She had always believed in duty, in serving others, in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. And now it was Lily's turn to ensure that the next generation of soldiers carried those values with them in the same quiet, steadfast way her mother had. "I'll make sure they know," Lily said, her voice steady, filled with the quiet determination that had always been her mother's hallmark. "I'll make sure they understand what it means to serve, not for the recognition, but for the sake of something greater." General Hawthorne smiled, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "I know you will, and I'll be here, supporting you every step of the way." With that, Lily turned and walked out of the office, the weight of her mother's legacy no longer a burden, but a guiding light. As she stepped into the fading sunlight, she felt the torch pass from one generation to the next, the legacy of Emily Hayes now firmly in her hands. And in that moment, Lily knew that she was ready, not just to honor the past, but to lead into the future with the same quiet strength, humility, and dignity her mother had always shown. The morning sun crept through the windows of the office, casting long shadows across the floor. The base had come to life, the sound of footsteps, distant, chatter, and the occasional clink of metal filling the air. But for Lily, this morning felt different. It wasn't just the light filtering in or the bustle of the soldiers preparing for the day. It was the quiet sense of finality, of completion. She had taken up her mother's mantle, but now it was time for her to step forward and create her own place in the story. The ceremony honoring her mother had been a turning point. It had brought the base together in a way that Lily had never imagined. Soldiers, officers, cadets, each one had paused just for a moment to reflect on the legacy of Emily Hayes. But the days following the ceremony had been filled with something deeper. There had been a shift in the way soldiers carried themselves, in the way they spoke about duty, sacrifice, and honor. The torch had been passed, but the work of carrying it forward was just beginning. Lily sat at the desk in the office, the papers before her almost forgotten as she gazed out the window. Her mind raced through the next steps. There were plans to put in motion, soldiers to train, lessons to impart. But it was more than that. She wasn't just filling her mother's shoes, she was creating her own legacy, one that honored everything her mother had stood for, but also moved beyond it. The base needed leadership that didn't just reflect the past. It needed leaders who would shape the future, soldiers who understood that service wasn't just about accolades or recognition, but about something deeper. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Lily turned to see General Hawthorne standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made her sit up straighter. He wasn't here for a report or to discuss logistics. There was a weight to his presence, a quiet respect that spoke volumes without a word being said. "Lily," he said softly, stepping into the room, "I wanted to talk to you before the day begins. I think it's time we take this to the next level." Lily raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean?" "I mean, it's time for you to step into a new role," General Hawthorne said, his voice steady. "You've proven yourself here. You've honored your mother's legacy, and you've done it with strength, with humility, and with courage. But now it's time for you to lead in your own right." Lily's heart skipped a beat. "Lead in what way?" He walked around the desk and placed a small file in front of her. "You've earned your place, and it's time you start shaping the future of this base." We've had several discussions about bringing in a new training initiative, something focused on leadership, service, and character building. It's a program that will honor the foundation your mother built here, but also evolve with the needs of the soldiers who will follow. Lily's gaze dropped to the file, her pulse quickening. She had known this day would come, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. This wasn't just about honoring her mother's legacy. It was about building a future, one that would teach the soldiers of tomorrow what it meant to lead, to serve, and to sacrifice, just as her mother had. "I'll take it on," Lily said, her voice steady, the weight of the decision settling around her like a cloak. "I'm ready." General Hawthorne nodded, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I knew you would be. We're going to do something great here, Lily, and you'll be at the heart of it." Lily stood, her chest swelling with a sense of purpose she hadn't fully grasped until now. The future was in her hands, not just as her mother's daughter, but as the leader she had always been destined to become. She wasn't just filling a space. She was creating one, carving out a place for herself and for the soldiers who would, one day, follow her lead. As she walked out of the office, the weight of her mother's legacy and her own future settled into place. A new chapter was beginning. The torch had been passed, and now Lily would carry it forward, not as a shadow of the past, but as a beacon for what was to come.